Hi,
You look wonderful.
as do you. I feel like we're twinning.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're here to talk about merch.
Yes.
And I want to, introduce, of course, I've introduced myself already, so you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your vision. And I was looking at the description, because when I was looking at how I would introduce what merch was, it said culture wear. So I want to get into that to start.
Thank you for having me. I'm Colby Mugrabi. I'm the founder of Merch, which is a Web3 native generative fashion brand. And we position ourselves as culture wear. So, thinking about kind of the new paradigm of clothes that you wear to a museum, to a gallery event, to experience culture, all different types of culture. So we were trying to get away from being kind of pigeonholed as a streetwear brand. Obviously, I know we'll get into the product side. We do generative hoodies, has been our first two drops. So we really want to contextualize merch with that cultural narrative as opposed to a streetwear narrative, as opposed to an activewear narrative. For us, everything boils down to culture.
And because your background is very much on the traditional fashion and art side as well, primarily. So how do we build these bridges, right? And how do we sort of bring the traditional fashion and art world into what's happening with technology, Web3, blockchain? What was your vision when you actually thought of this project to start with?
So I have a background in traditional fashion and art. I have been obsessed with fashion since I was a little girl, like a 7-year-old girl in Chicago who would set their alarm early in the morning during Paris Fashion Week so I could look at the runway shows before school. I started working at a very young age, interning. I was Teen Vogue's Teen Fashion Week correspondent, so I would report from New York and Paris Fashion Week from the teens' perspective. And I went to the Gallatin School at NYU, where you design your own major. I studied art history and fashion business. And when I graduated, I sort of applied that very interdisciplinary approach that I took to my education to original content. So I launched a website called Mini Muse, where I create original content surrounding the history of art, fashion, architecture, and design. Kept up with that for about 5 years, did some incredible partnerships with some of the world's top brands, artists, galleries, museums. And then my husband is an art dealer. So in March of 2021, when the Beeple sale happened, which completely turned, the art world on its head. Who is this artist Beeple? What's an NFT? My husband's phone started ringing off the hook. I was overhearing all of his conversations. It was still COVID time. Everyone was working from home. And I just started researching Web3. At the time, the metaverse was the big buzzword, NFTs, and realized almost instantaneously that this is the future. This is where my brand should live. What is the Mini Muse version of, the blockchain? And throughout the course of a few months, I discovered art blocks, started learning about generative art, and I immediately thought, why has no one ever applied a generative design process towards physical product? And that's how I came up with the idea for merch.
That's incredible. And you've just had a recent drop that was sold out success with Danny Seedphrase and Claire Silver. But your first drop was actually with a traditional artist. So is this, you are really at the intersection of blending traditional and Web3 worlds.
And that's always been my motivation. That's been my primary goal, and it's such a kind of, I think, metaphor for every single thing I touch, which is with Mini Muse, I would write about a fashion collection through the lens of architecture, or I would talk about a painting in the context of industrial design. So when I started kind of developing this idea for merch, I really wanted it to represent the intersection of Web3 and traditional fashion. And I not only wanted it to be the Web3 world's bridge to traditional fashion, but I want merch to be the onboarding function to bring a more physical world, traditional fashion consumer into the space. So the first drop, as you mentioned, was we commissioned a comic book artist named Gilbert Hernandez. He did the artwork for the NFTs, but it wasn't co-branded per se like this second drop was. It was purely a commission, and to me, the Genesis drop represented merch as a vision. 2.5 years culminating to this one moment, this mint that, like, I think over the course of those 2.5 years, we went from the height of the bull market to like the depths of the bear market. And I still had bull market mentality in my mind. And so I was assuming it would mint out instantly, which it minted out in 72 hours, which coincidentally the second drop did as well. But this, to me, our Genesis drop represented those 2.5 years of work and just bringing this concept into reality and pushing it to market. Whereas our second drop that you just mentioned, in collaboration with Seed Phrase, Claire Silver, Swarovski, and in partnership with Christie's, that represents the merch of today and of the future, which is not only about onboarding consumers into the space, but really being an architect of brands and institutions and giving them the opportunity to come into Web3 without needing to set up all the infrastructure on their side. So I want merch to be that conduit between all of these different but very similar worlds.
Yes, and I'm always very curious because, I get asked this question a lot of times as well because I come also from a more traditional fashion background. And to people who are maybe not in a very crypto native or digitally native space, I do get questioned all the time with people who are maybe from a more traditional background who are curious but not really fully aware or in understanding of what exactly all of this means. How do you explain what it is you do?
I mean, it is just, this is like the constant challenge that just haunts me every single day is like, my mom always asks me, she's like, how do I explain what you do to people? Like, they know you're doing something, but I don't know how to explain it to them. Well, that's actually kind of a proxy for what our current kind of goal is and motivation before our next drop is how do we distill this down to an even more simplistic form, So for the first drop, for example, we had to take inventory because there was no factory in the world that's set up to produce one-of-one product at scale. Obviously, being a generative fashion brand, all of the outputs are one-of-one based off their unique combination of colors, pattern, material, trait count. So we took inventory on that first drop, meaning we could leave the redemption window open. For this second drop, obviously every NFT is backed by a one-of-one physical. For this second drop, there's a condensed redemption period, which ends end of day Friday. If anyone here is a drop 2 holder, please redeem. So that even is like a new paradigm for consumers to, buy something, mint something in a digital form as an NFT, redeem a physical. That's a process. It's an added layer. So we're constantly trying to think of like how can we make this more simple? how can we distill this down to its most simplistic form, but still be authentic to the original vision, which is sitting at the intersection of traditional fashion and Web3.
And is part of that vision? Does part of that vision also entail bringing new people into the space that are perhaps not already in Web3 or not understanding of how to, is that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think Eric mentioned this a few minutes ago when he was speaking. The space is so small right now comparative to what it was and, hugely small compared to the luxury fashion space. So I can't, as a brand that is creating product, it's hard to rely on the same, few thousand wallets to potentially participate each time. So absolutely, our objective is for merch to be not only a conduit between these worlds, but a bridge to onboard more traditional luxury consumers, art collectors into the space. And, a number of people participated in the first drop outside of the Web3 space, which there's truly no more kind of authentic show of like affection and support than like a trad fashion or art buyer going through all the trouble of like setting up a wallet, funding it to participate in the drop. Like I saw true friends really show up that first time, and I will never forget that. And for this second drop, as I mentioned, we partnered with Christie's, and for me, that was our kind of olive branch to, hey, you can participate in this drop if you have a Christie's account, which is obviously, most people maybe in the space, but outside of the space. So with each drop moving forward, we're looking to expand that footprint and that potential even more.
Amazing. And are you going to also look at the intersection of other, I mean, we are talking about this new cultural paradigm, other verticals across the creative space, like music perhaps, or?
I mean, music is hugely interesting to me on the wearable wallet side. So I think that's one of the biggest shifts from this kind of pre-drop, pre-go-to-market mentality versus this, post-drop 2 mentality. Every single one of our physicals comes with an NFC chip where you can access what we call your wearable wallet. So every merch physical comes with its own Web3 wallet. And through your wearable wallet, you get access to events, you get access to potentially institutions, gallery exhibitions, and you can accrue experience tokens. So the first experience token opportunity we did was last May. We partnered with Tom Sachs, the artist who lives in New York, and he had a Picasso show at his studio down in Soho. And he did an original drawing for us, digital drawing. And if you wore your merch hoodie to Tom's Picasso show, you got a Tom Sachs experience token sent to your wearable wallet. So there's about 24 merch hoodies in the world that now own a Tom Sachs NFT through their wearable wallet. And for me, that's really interesting. And this idea of, we're sort of positioning it as proof of provenance, yes, but also fandom for culture. And fandom is such a huge part of the music industry. And obviously the history of merch as a category, not in the way we necessarily mean it, but just traditional merch, comes from the music industry. So 100% we're looking to explore that more. Also, I love the idea of generative furniture.
You should speak to Ismail then from Tram.
Yes, absolutely. So I think sporting too, in terms of the wearable wallet functionality, there's so many different verticals that we can explore through this kind of multi-layered approach we take to our company. And it's more about just focusing on doing one thing at a time rather than doing 10 things simultaneously.
That's incredible. I love that actually, because the whole ethos, I can't remember who it was, but someone that said, if a brand has to be successful, today you sell less product and more experiences, right? You sell more memories.
That's so funny. I was at a dinner last night with sitting next to Jonathan Anderson from Loewe, and we were talking about the importance of experience to luxury today. There's obviously, a lot of the luxury brands have been hit hard in the last few quarters, but because there's a reallocation from spending on luxury goods to spending on experiences, and all of these brands today are now in the experience world too, whether it be restaurants, whether it be opening hotels, whether it be sponsoring exhibitions. I think these brands have become such powerhouses and paradigms for culture. They can't just sell handbags or clothes anymore. They need to sell the lifestyle that comes with that.
Exactly. I'm completely with you. So just to end, what's next? If you could give us a little alpha taster of what's coming up.
I would say building out our wearable wallet network more. There's now over 1,000 merch hoodies in the world, meaning there's 1,000 wearable wallets and 1,000 holders that can engage in these events that we have. I would say broadening the ecosystem and figuring out how we can approach our next drop that really speaks to not only a Web3 NFT collector, but also a traditional fashion and art collector. So just constantly challenging ourselves to, simplify, and broadening the ecosystem.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.